I'm David Wray, a numismatist and collector of ancient coins and artifacts, particularly those related to the transition in the West from a predominantly pagan society to a predominantly Christian society. 5 years ago, I published a book called The Secret Roots of Christianity, which uses images mostly from ancient coins to track political, religious, and social changes in the West before, during, and immediately after the lifetime of Jesus of Nazareth. Focusing on coin symbols helps reveal the importance of astrology in the West during the same period. An appreciation of the role that astrology played in the development of Christianity is profoundly revealing about true Christian origins. My first movie introduced an astrological understanding of the sign of Jonah as the astrological keystone for decoding early Christian iconography. My second movie continued decoding early Christian iconography in terms of Gnostic beliefs about astrological ascent and descent. The movie compared ancient artifacts from Rome and Judea, focusing particularly on the Orpheus mosaic, originally found in a mortuary chapel in Jerusalem. My third movie looked at evidence for the presence of Gnostic astrological ideas on ancient zodiac mosaics in synagogues of Jews who respected astrological teachings of Jesus centuries after his death. This fourth movie applies lessons learned about Gnostic astrological iconography from the first three movies to look for the earliest Jewish Christian symbols from a fresh, new perspective. Specifically, this movie begins with a review of the astrological basis of the sign of Jonah, and then addresses this question: how did observant Jews in the Jesus movement refer graphically to the sign of Jonah before and shortly after the trial and crucifixion of Jesus? By the middle of the first millennium, mainstream Judaism and Orthodox Christianity both branded New Age astrological and Gnostic movements as heretical. Christians and Jews cooperated, attempting to purge Gnosticism from acceptable practice. Nevertheless, groups of Gnostic Christians and Jews maintained ancient astrological understandings of the universe and preserved the memory of the original astrological event we call the Star of Bethlehem. Jesus and his original followers spoke of it as the sign of Jonah. In his book, The Star of Bethlehem, Legacy of the Magi, Michael Molnar describes his discovery that a 4th century Christian astrologer, Julius Firmicus Maternus, wrote a detailed description of astrological elements that indicated a divine incarnation. Complicated and rare, these elements required a favorable context that only experienced astrologers, magi, could evaluate. Nevertheless, the key distinguishing feature involved Jupiter and the moon in a relationship that anyone easily could recognize. On the first morning that Jupiter emerged from behind the sun, its heliacal rising, barely visible in the glare of the morning sky as a star in the east, the thinnest crescent moon would cover the planet. The moon then would disappear in the sun's glare, returning 3 days later at sunset as the new moon. Searching for a matching astronomical event, Molnar found only one occurrence during the most likely period of the birth of Jesus, April 17th, 6 BC. Ancient magi, searching for indications of a divine birth, would have considered the planetary configuration on that date as spectacular. Not because it looked pretty, but because of the astrological meaning of all its components. Notably, the occurrence of the occultation in Aries signified Judea as the location of the divine birth. An astrological sign meeting all the requirements for ancient magi to recognize a divine incarnation occurs only once every few thousand years. That such a rare sign occurred at all during the period associated with the birth of Jesus is remarkable. Even to untrained eyes, an astrology chart for the morning of April 17th, 6 BC, offers hints about the special nature of the planetary configuration that day. The sun, moon, and all the planets clustered closely together. Mercury and Mars favorably occupied Taurus. The sun, Jupiter, moon, and Saturn favorably occupied Aries. And observation easily verified that the moon would cover Jupiter. Further, the special placement of Venus in the beginning of Pisces confirmed the end of the age of Aries and the beginning of the age of Pisces. The specific location of the Jupiter occultation on this date reminded Jews of the story of Jonah. Positioned where the open maw of the constellation Ketos, the sea beast that swallowed Jonah, attacked the belly of Aries the ram, the moon reinforced the connection, looking like a monstrous mouth preparing to bite Jupiter. Then, as happened every month, the moon disappeared for 3 days until it re-emerged at sunset as the new moon. One easily can understand why Jews who expected the imminent appearance of a prophet at the dawn of the age of Pisces might refer to this event as the sign of Jonah. Details of this astronomical event explain the design of coins minted during the Roman census of Judea, discrepancies between gospel accounts of the birth of Jesus, and even technical Greek astrological terms used in the Gospels. For example, in the Gospel of Matthew, Magi, astrologers, saw a sign, the occultation in the east. Astrological signs seen just before sunrise always communicated the most important information. Then, Jupiter went retrograde on August 23rd, 6 BC, translated in modern scripture as going on before. That encouraged Magi to follow the star west toward Judea until it stopped on December 19th, 6 BC, as they entered Bethlehem. Jupiter then returned to direct motion in modern astronomical terms. Rolling the view of this astronomical configuration away from sunrise and bringing the sun to its noontime position, one can see that all the wandering lights of the sky, sun, moon, and planets, had gathered together. The Gospel of Luke speaks of a multitude of heavenly hosts praising God, announcing the birth of Jesus. At this moment in history, a multitude of heavenly hosts literally meant a noteworthy gathering of heavenly lights in one part of the sky. However, Luke identified the year as 7 AD, 13 years later than Matthew, when Governor Quirinius placed Judea completely under Roman control and conducted the first census for tax purposes. Having previously studied astrology with Tiberius on Rhodes, and perhaps noticing local cognizance of the previous heliacal rising of Jupiter in Aries, Quirinius saw Jupiter's heliacal rising in Aries in 7 AD as divine approval of the complete extension of Roman dominion over Judea. Thus, he portrayed Jupiter and Aries prominently on his coins. Later, Christians in Antioch conflated the heliacal rising of Jupiter denoted by coins of Quirinius with the earlier heliacal rising associated with the birth of Jesus. This accidentally introduced an error of 13 years in the Gospel of Luke. Michael Molnar's analysis suggests that early Christians preserved an astrological understanding of the Star of Bethlehem for at least several centuries. As evidenced in the first movie of this series, one can see the inspiration for sophisticated early Christian Jonah iconography in the shapes of asterisms in the constellations Aries, Ketos, and Pisces, as they participated in the astrological sign of Saturday, April 17th, 6 BC. Shabbat, Nisan 29, 3755 in the Jewish calendar. The clearest metaphorical components are Ketos attacking Jupiter under the belly of Aries, the ram, and the symbolic association of Jonah with the constellation Pisces. Ancient tradition in the Levant saw Pisces not as two fish, but as a fish to the left of Pegasus and a pigeon beneath Pegasus. The cords that connected the fish and the pigeon represented the Euphrates River and the Tigris River, respectively. Jonah, whose name means pigeon in Hebrew, was deposited by Ketos at Nineveh, modern Mosul, on the bank of the Tigris River next to a garden. In the ancient Levant, the great square of Pegasus represented a garden. From a Gnostic New Age point of view, early Jewish Christians interpreted the act of throwing Jonah overboard to be eaten by Ketos as symbolic of the original fall of divine spirit. Through the gate in Cancer, splitting into spiritual and emotional being in Gemini, falling like Auriga, either as a good shepherd or a solar charioteer during the age of Taurus, and crashing to form the Eridanus riverbed in the demonic belly of this universe. During the age of Pisces, spirit symbolically rose from the Eridanus riverbed and passed through Ketos to be expelled where the lower fish or bird of Pisces rests beneath a heavenly garden. That is, the great square of Pegasus. Associated simultaneously with the birth of Jesus and the beginning of the age of Pisces, the astrological sign of Jonah inspired bursts of iconographic creativity among both Jewish and Christian followers of Jesus. Archaeologists are accustomed to early Christian images portraying anchors, fish, boats, and Ketos swallowing Jonah. But they rarely connect these symbols, or any Jewish symbols, to astrology. One can see similar astrological connections of Jewish and Christian symbols by comparing the image on the base of the Jerusalem temple menorah on the Arch of Titus with those on the ivories of St. Peter's chair. We will see that both artifacts refer to an abbreviated course of ascent constellations. Josephus confirmed in both the Antiquities of the Jews and the Jewish War that the lamps of the menorah represented the 7 moving lights in the sky, the sun, moon, and 5 known planets. He neglected to speak about the base of the menorah, which confirms long-standing interest by Jews in the astronomical path of ascent. The base of the Jerusalem temple menorah graphically represents the great cross formed by solstices and equinoxes. Specifically, it represents cardinal directions relative to the sun's path in terms of horizon constellations visible at night on Rosh Hashanah, the autumnal equinox. Viewing the southern sky from the newly built First Temple late on Rosh Hashanah, shortly after 1000 BC, King Solomon saw Leo on the left horizon, where the eastern ecliptic rises, and Capricorn on the right horizon, where the western ecliptic sets. The ascent constellations, Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, and Cancer, stretched from west to east along the ecliptic across the southern sky, like reading from right to left in Hebrew. The constellation Ketos rested on the horizon directly beneath the vernal equinox, the intersection of the ecliptic and the celestial equator in Aries, the middle of the ascent constellations. The meridian line traveled from the head of Ketos through the vernal equinox, over Solomon's head and through the north ecliptic pole until it finally reached the constellation Corona Borealis, a victory wreath or crown behind Solomon's back on the northern horizon between the constellations Heracles and Bootes. On the menorah, the preponderance of snake-tailed creatures represents the ancient understanding that sinuous finned tails facilitated travel in the watery heavens above the firmament. On the left side of the menorah, sea-going lion-headed beasts correspond to Leo in the east near the summer solstice, and on the right, a Capricorn represents the west near the winter solstice. The menorah portrays the southern position of Kitos in the center of the lower row, and the northern position of Corona Borealis as a wreath guarded by eagles in the center of the upper row. Eagles guarded the crown of the deity who controlled the path of the sun from the northern center of the circular ecliptic. Fall nights are the best time of year to view all the ascent constellations at night, which explains why illustrations of Rosh Hashanah readings represent Earth, and illustrations of Ascent Month readings represent sky in the Sepphoris Synagogue Zodiac mosaic examined in the third movie. When Jesus was born, the equinoxes had drifted with precession, so that the Corona Borealis no longer lay on the equinoctial meridian referenced on the Jerusalem temple menorah. However, Kitos and Corona Borealis always stand opposite each other, across a diameter of the ecliptic passing through the north ecliptic pole. Unlike the celestial equator, the ecliptic and its north pole never change their positions. The north ecliptic pole always marks the center of the ecliptic between the bent neck and body of the constellation Draco. Nevertheless, the last time a meridian connected Kitos, the north ecliptic pole, and Draco, Corona Borealis, and the equinoxes, the astronomical relationship that inspired the menorah's design, fresh smoke was rising from the first temple sacrifices in the Jerusalem sky. Images on the menorah capture the relationship between Kitos and Corona Borealis in a first temple sky so accurately that one wonders, did the menorah that Titus paraded through Rome actually illuminate the first temple? Or did later craftsmen recreate its design, intentionally using images that matched the positions of constellations during First Temple times? One sees similar early Christian interest in astrology, and the constellations of ascent on the ivories on St. Peter's chair in the Vatican. The top two rows portray scenes from the 12 labors of Hercules, from left to right in the top row: strangling the Nemean lion, battling the echidna or Lernaean hydra, capturing the Erymanthian boar, capturing the Carinian doe, capturing the Cretan bull, and chasing away the Stymphalian birds. From left to right in the middle row, cleaning the Augean stables, wrestling Antaeus, conflated with wrestling Death in the story about capturing the red cattle of Geryon, capturing the man-eating mares of Diomedes, fetching Kerberos from the underworld, obtaining the girdle of Queen Hippolyte, queen of the Amazons, and fetching golden apples from the tree of life in the garden of the Hesperides. The labors of Heracles attached easily to Christianity. Heracles committed the worst sins possible, yet he still entered heaven by struggling diligently to expiate his sins. Further, the 12 labors corresponded to the 12 zodiacal constellations, emphasizing that each sign brought characteristic challenges and lessons during the year. In the bottom row, the second, third, and fourth ivories from the left represent constellations symbolizing the middle, end, and beginning of the astrological path of ascent. Ketos, Cancer, and Capricorn, respectively. Modern eyes commonly identify the third ivory as a scorpion, representing the constellation Scorpio. But ancient eyes in Italy would have understood the ascent context of the image and recognized either a Mediterranean lobster or the giant Italian sea scorpion, Lancia, either animal serving as an appropriate symbol of the constellation Cancer. The fifth ivory could represent a scene from the labor of Heracles capturing the red cattle of Geryon. In this adventure, Heracles sailed in the cup of Helios. This represents the Gnostic journey that brought divine spirit to this universe, while simultaneously acknowledging that a 13th month sometimes had to be added to a lunar year. However, the image of Heracles in a cup and holding a cup also might represent Aquarius, the second constellation on the astrological path of ascent. Like the zodiacal creatures on the menorah, capable of living in the watery realm above the firmament, the two remaining creatures on left and right of the bottom row of St. Peter's chair appear snake-like, representing their ability to navigate the watery realm of heaven. They derived from an Egyptian tradition of portraying the deity Harpocrates, equivalent to baby Jesus in Egyptian nativity scenes, as the child of Serapis and Isis Thermutis, the principal male and female Egyptian deities commonly portrayed in the form of snakes during Hellenistic times. These deities entered Gnosticism as the male Agathodaimon, or Canubis, and Sophia. Canubis usually wore the head of a lion. Nevertheless, the body of this creature curves in 3 loops, reminiscent of the 3-part symbol of Canubis. There's also an interesting astronomical coincidence. If one matches the image on the ivory with the bent neck and head of the constellation Draco, the north ecliptic pole would occupy the same relative position as the center point of the ivory. The creature on the rightmost ivory has a woman's face and head. To Gnostics, she represented Sophia, the divine personification of knowledge who sought to liberate divine spirit from its earthly prison. Let's look at more early Jewish Christian symbols. An ossuary in the resurrection tomb next to the Jesus family tomb bears a symbol labeled Jonah in Aramaic that portrays a giant fish swallowing a man. The chevron head of the fish bears a structural resemblance to the symbol on the Jesus family tomb. Other ossuaries in the resurrection tomb also portray other curious symbols. On one ossuary, arranged like a Gnostic magic inscription, 4 words in Greek and Aramaic invoke the name of God, Dios and Yah, as well as resurrection, upso and agba as rise up. Symbolic portrayals of fish also appear. During a time when people commonly associated a specific occultation of Jupiter by the moon with the astrological sign of Jonah, rudimentary crescent and star symbols began to represent Jesus. Ossuaries found in the Jesus family tomb carry names of the family of Jesus. On the ossuary labeled Jesus, son of Joseph, the lid bears graffiti reminiscent of the occultation of Jupiter by the moon in 6 BC. Above the entrance to the tomb, a sign of Jonah represents a lunar occultation of Jupiter, as well as resembling an anchor, a Hasmonean royal symbol. One finds this symbol on Christian ossuaries in a line of tombs extending from the Jesus family tomb in Talpiot to Dominus Flevit, the place where Jesus cried before his crucifixion. The symbol even appears on an ossuary long identified as that of Simon of Cyrene and his son. Simon was the man who helped Jesus carry the cross. The anchor already served as a symbol of Jewish royalty. Thus, after the crucifixion, it was a small leap for Jewish followers to combine the crescent and star, sign of Jonah, with the cross to make an anchor, declaring that Jesus was the rightful, hereditary king of the Jews. The earliest Christian iconography associated with Roman camps uses a mixture of Jewish, Christian, and pagan symbols. For example, a cave-like church near Jericho, used by Christians in the Roman army in the 1st century A.D., contains a peculiar mixture of images. Fish identical to those on the resurrection tomb ossuaries, crosses with angular crescents on the ends, solar symbols similar to those of Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, as well as a Roman military standard. Near Megiddo, a 3rd century Roman house church associated with a legionary camp of the 6th Verata, contains an ornate geometric mosaic with 2 fish in the center and a dedication by a Roman officer to the God, Jesus Christ. Recognizing that the builders intended worshippers to see the mosaic as a zodiac depends on understanding a Roman graphical convention. 4 equilateral triangles mark the solstice and equinox points of the Great Cross. They acted like the triangular pointers on the Arch of Titus. There, Roman soldiers can be seen carrying placards with triangles pointing at descriptions of Jewish temple treasures. Seeing this, one can understand that exactly 12 four-sided figures around the central roundel represented constellations of the zodiac grouped in seasonal triplets. The central roundel portrays 2 fish inside a solar disk. This emphasized that the birth of Jesus under the sign of Jonah had announced the entrance of the vernal equinox sun in Pisces, marking the beginning of the age of Pisces. The obvious resemblance of this church mosaic to synagogue zodiac mosaics exemplifies common Christian and Jewish respect for Jesus as a divine solar being who announced the arrival of a new spiritual age. Nevertheless, by the middle of the 4th century A.D., Orthodox Christianity and Judaism had both won major battles against astrologically oriented worshippers of Jesus. The Church acknowledged an early belief that the birth of Jesus had occurred in April. However, Pope Julius I established December 25th as the official birthday of Jesus. By the 5th century, it's understandable that the Sephora Synagogue zodiac mosaic oriented astrological symbols associated with the birth of Jesus toward the winter solstice. Whether Jewish or Christian, followers of Jesus continued using classic crescent and star symbols to represent Mary and the birth of Jesus as a solar deity. But did Jesus use a different sign of Jonah during his lifetime? Let's return to the astronomical context of the sign of Jonah in its form as a midday sky over Jerusalem on April 17th, 6 BC. New Age Jews intimately knew the structure of this half of the sky, the gnostic path of salvation, because at Rosh Hashanah they searched it carefully from Capricorn in the western horizon through Aquarius, Pisces, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, to Cancer on the eastern horizon for signs of coming events in the new year. In April, the daytime sun rendered constellations, planets, and even the moon invisible. But we can see the constellations using a model of the darkened sky. One also can appreciate the appropriate positioning of lamps under the planetary configuration of the sign of Jonah, such that one luminous body stands above each lamp. one sees immediately that Jews who understood the images on the Jerusalem temple menorah appreciated the placement of the sign of Jonah in this view of the sky. Also visible in a sky showing the zodiacal path of ascent, other constellations portray mythological images associated with the descent of spirit. For example, after passing through the heavenly gate in Cancer, divine spirit split in two through Gemini into Auriga and Orion. Then, unable to reconcile reason and emotion, fell to earth at the beginning of the age of Taurus. Divine spirit crashed into incarnation, its solar chariot ripping up the path of the Eridanus River. The sign of Jonah metaphorically echoed this event. The constellation Ketos swallowed Jupiter and the moon in Aries, as the universe swallowed divine spirit in the age of Taurus. The moon then disappeared in the sun's glare, emerging on the third day, echoing the confinement of divine spirit in the age of Taurus, continuing in the age of Aries, and ending in the third age, that of Pisces. The constellation Ketos symbolically initiates ascent. Divine spirit rises from Eridanus and then passes through Ketos, which expels Jonah on the lower branch of the constellation Pisces, the Tigris riverbank next to the great square of Pegasus, a garden. Thus, at the time of the sign of Jonah, myth, constellations, and planets combined in a symbolic swoosh around the sun, resembling the shape of crescent and star symbols on the Talpiot Jesus family tomb. In conjunction with this analysis, a strange statement about Jesus in the Talmud illuminates a carved stone recently discovered in the Magdala synagogue. The Talmud speaks about the student-master relationship between Jesus and Rabbi Yehoshua ben Pariah, a famous teacher of Babylonian magic. They had a falling out after Jesus set up a brick and worshipped it. The Talmud fails to mention images carved into the surface of the brick. However, it wouldn't be surprising for a rabbi to abandon a student who used astronomical symbols on brick or stone to brand himself as a New Age prophet. Further, this adds new perspective to St. Paul's statement in his epistle to Romans, referring to Jesus metaphorically as a stone of scandal, or stumbling block. Let's consider these statements as we look at the Migdal stone, an early to mid-1st century artifact found in the synagogue of Mary Magdalene, where Jesus of Nazareth attended services. The Migdal stone measures approximately 2 feet by 1 3/4 feet by 1.5 feet, and has 5 decorated surfaces. It apparently served as the base of a platform for reading the Torah during Jewish services. Carved before the First Jewish War in the mid-1st century A.D., the stone portrays images related to the Jerusalem temple. 11 stone columns, 12 loaves of bread, a 7-branched menorah, an incense burner, and receptacles for water or oil. Jews understood their temple as representing the universe. Thus, carvings on the top and sides of the Migdal stone also reflect features of a Jewish model of the universe. Encoding a legacy of centuries of Jewish beliefs and practices, Orthodox Talmudic Judaism proscribed the artistic rendering of the Jerusalem temple and its paraphernalia. Sometimes one finds exceptions to this rule in artifacts from times of historical stress. For example, just before succumbing to attacks by Herod the Great leading Roman forces, the Maccabean king Mattathias Antigonus minted coins with images of the 7-branched temple menorah and the showbread table. Perhaps he hoped to invoke divine assistance, as well as instill confidence in his Jewish subjects. Nevertheless, the Talmud states that images of menorot should differ from the Jerusalem temple menorah, including either fewer or more arms than 7, or varying in some other way from a true likeness. Apparent attempts by the creator of the Migdal stone to accurately depict Jewish paraphernalia hint that rules of worship for Magdala Jews differed from rules in the Orthodox stream of Judaism. The southern side of the Migdal stone portrays columns along the left and right edges, a menorah standing on a table, or perhaps behind an altar, and 2 amphorae flanking the menorah. The only side spanned by a curved arch, the southern side represents the graceful arc of the zodiacal ecliptic across the southern sky. Representing planets, sun, and moon, the lights of the menorah terminate directly on the ecliptic, reminiscent of our astrological view of the sign of Jonah in a sky filled with ascent constellations. If the craftsman, in fact, intended the astronomical lights of this menorah to represent a historical configuration of planets, then he intended the stone to model the universe on April 17th, 6 BC. Understood as a view of the south, the lamps of the menorah then represented Mercury, Mars, Sun, Moon, Jupiter, Saturn, and Venus. Consistent with symbols on the base of the Jerusalem temple menorah, the 2 solstices lie on the horizon to the left and right. The 2 amphorae represented containers for heavenly water and sacred oil. Viewing the stone's western side, 4 archways support a flat roof. Through the left 3 arches, bundles of wheat or barley represent earthly harvests that support human life. A piece of hanging pottery in the rightmost arch serves either as an incense burner, a lamp, or a container for sacred oil. As functional parts of a model of the universe, the columns on all sides represent structures that support the sky. Different from the relatively mundane symbols on the other stone faces, the north side refers to an active process. Of 3 visible columns, the 2 edge columns support a flat roof, but the central column supports a cart whose wheels dangle to the left and right. Beneath the wheels, tongues of flame burn temple sacrifices. The cart and flames lie juxtaposed on a portion of the model universe where zodiacal constellations symbolized the descent of divine spirit to earth. Thus, the north face refers astrologically to the descent of either Adam Kadmon during the age of Taurus or a solar being sent to liberate divine spirit in the new age of Pisces. Imagery on the north side of the Migdal stone connects it to Hermetic and Kabalistic ideas associated with God riding a solar chariot in the book of Ezekiel, echoed by the Greek myth of Phaeton. Solar iconography on the north side of the stone also carries other interesting mythical and directional associations. A wreath on the Jerusalem temple menorah locates Corona Borealis as just one constellation in this part of the sky. Sandwiched between Heracles and Bootes, this northern crown connected to Greek salvation mysteries associated with Dionysius. As described in the 3rd movie, ancient Levantine tradition associated Heracles' stars closest to the celestial pole with the heavenly temple of the god Enlil. Jews also associated the north, Zaphon in Hebrew, with the realm of God. For example, Psalm 48 conflates Mount Zion with Mount Zaphon, a mountain north of Judea long known to Phoenicians as the home of Baal, and to Romans as the home of Jupiter Cassios. Syrians associated Zeus Cassios with a sacred meteorite or betel, and Romans portrayed the deity as a youthful Apollonian Zeus. In Egypt, Hermeticists associated Zeus Cassios with the child of Isis, called Horus or Harpocrates. Not long before a Jewish craftsman carved the Migdal stone, Tiberius Caesar funded this carving of a nativity scene in Philae, Egypt, dedicated to Isis and her newborn son, Harpocrates. Dated 23 AD, the scene portrays Isis and her son receiving gifts from wise and powerful dignitaries, that is, Tiberius Caesar and Egyptian gods. These traditions, in concert with mystery traditions associated with Dionysius, Attis, and Hermetic traditions associated with Hermes Kriophoros, contributed the bulk of what became Christian iconography. Images on the east side of the stone duplicate those on the west side of the stone. The top surface of the stone carries its richest and most enigmatic iconographic details. A 6-petal rosette rests just north of center. Rosettes like this commonly appear on Jewish ossuaries. Jews sometimes have used this rosette as a pattern on synagogue floors. Historically, Christians also widely use the symbol as protection against the evil eye. To the east and west of the rosette, 2 objects resemble palm trees or bundled reeds bound together. 5 strangely shaped objects lie above the rosette, and 7 lie below. Viewed as temple paraphernalia, the 2 tree-like objects represent brooms or rakes for cleaning the temple, and the 12 objects above and below the rosette represent the 12 pieces of showbread. 4 scars on the corners of the stone reveal that the stone originally had a second level, perhaps an undecorated panel that supported a Torah read aloud during services. The iconography on the top surface of the Migdal stone connects to astrological ideas in interesting ways. Shifted toward the north, the rosette represents the north circumpolar sky, God's throne in the heavens, suitable for viewing the whole universe at every moment, night or day. This suggests that ancient Jews understood the rosette symbol as a type of God's eye, enabling God to see inside roofed buildings and even into tombs to witness acts of evil and desecration. The 2 tree-like objects resemble Egyptian depictions of world trees, supports of the firmament at the solstices that made it possible for the heavens to circle the earth. In a universe model of a specific moment, when ascent constellations filled the sky, the trees represented solstices on the eastern and western horizon. Most interesting of all, given the historical connection between Jesus and the Magdala synagogue, the 12 showbread loaves represented 12 zodiacal constellations, divided into groups of 5 and 7, a division consistent with Gnostic astrological ideas about ascent and descent. The 5 loaves on the north side of the rosette represented constellations of descent that lie below the horizon. The 7 loaves on the south side of the rosette represented the constellations of ascent. The combination of menorah, showbread loaves, and rosette suggests that the designer of the stone intended to represent a major daytime conjunction when the sun, moon, and planets occupied a narrow region of sky between Taurus and Pisces. The conjunction must have occurred sometime from March to May around the beginning of the first millennium. In short, the sign of Jonah on April 17th, 6 BC. Additional details emerge from close examination of the shapes of the 12 showbread loaves. The 2 heart shapes above and below the rosette portray ivy leaves, commonly associated with the salvation mysteries of Dionysius and his mother, Persephone. By participating in the mysteries of Dionysius, god of wine, worshippers acquired the ability to ask Persephone, queen of the underworld, for passage to a favorable part of the realm of Hades after death. In his first miracle ever, Jesus turned water into wine, echoing the miracle performed by Dionysius. On this stone, the 2 ivy leaves represented 2 saviors, or 2 types of salvation. Among the 5 loaves representing the descent, the upside-down ivy leaf indicated either the death of a Savior or the end of old ways of achieving salvation. Further examination of the loaves reveals that 2 loaves look like fish, 4 loaves combine into shapes of 2 fish, and 6 loaves look like 2 fish divided into 3 parts each, a reference to the 3 decans of the constellation Pisces. Above the rosette, the 5 loaves with representations of 2 fish recall accounts of feeding the 5,000, the only miracle that occurs in all 4 canonical Gospels. Jesus miraculously fed 5,000 men and uncounted women and children with only 5 loaves and 2 fish. Afterwards, followers gathered 12 baskets of leftovers. During the lifetime of Jesus, numbers in the thousands often metaphorically referred to stars. Thus, astrologically feeding the multitude with 5 loaves of heavenly bread and 2 fish referred to salvation possibilities available from descent spirituality, prefiguring creation of a direct path through the 7 levels of heaven during the age of Pisces. The 12 baskets of leftovers referred to spiritual teachings that sustain spirit every month of the year, but they also suggested entrapment in a never-ending cycle. Below the rosette, 7 loaves contain 2 small fish with eyes, fins, and scales visible up close. One also can see these 2 fish as the heads of 2 large fish that have been cut into 3 pieces. Thus, the 7 loaves representing the astrological path of ascent recall gospel accounts of feeding the 4,000 with 7 loaves and a few fish, and then collecting 7 baskets of leftovers afterwards. This suggests the possibility of a fast path to salvation, mastering 7 levels of knowledge represented by the 7 constellations of ascent, thus freeing divine spirit from the eternal cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. The number 9 represents life in Judaism, so 5,000 plus 4,000 represented every living soul. Feeding the 4,000, a smaller number than 5,000, referenced teachings that would not be suitable for everyone. Accounts of feeding the 4,000 occur only in the Gospels of Matthew and Mark. After performing this miracle, Jesus compared the 2 miracles of feeding the multitude for the benefit of his closest followers. He said, 5 loaves fed 5,000 with 12 baskets of scraps, and 7 loaves fed 4,000 with 7 baskets of scraps. Have you eyes that do not see and ears that do not hear? This suggests that the 2 miracles compared 2 ways of living spiritual lives. One way, intended for most people, 5,000 out of 9,000, left divine spirit enmeshed in astrological machinery. The other way placed one on a fast path of ascent through 7 constellations involving 7 initiations. Only this fast path released divine spirit from astrological control, enabling it to leave this universe and return to God. Jesus said that only heavenly bread nourished people, and he gave people bread from heaven instead of bread from the earth. Only the words of Jesus fed the soul, and only knowledge guided awakened spirit on its return path to oneness with God. Our analysis of the Migdal stone suggests that the New Age Jewish community that used it thought of Jesus of Nazareth as one of their own. Regarding who designed it when, imagine the moment in the ministry of Jesus before his last trip to Jerusalem, when he stayed in Magdala and sent his apostles to preach without him. The Gospels don't describe what Jesus did while he waited. Trained as a builder or tekton in the Galilee where most builders constructed dwellings from stone, Jesus could have created this metaphor of his central teaching initially in brick and then in stone. The disciples returned after they learned about the execution of John the Baptizer, only to find John's symbolic ivy leaf turned upside down. If Jesus ever made such a brick or carved such a stone, his closest Jewish followers would have remembered it. Similar pieces would be found in other Jewish contexts. Such evidence is sparse, but it exists. A stone in secondary use in a synagogue in Horvat Kur strongly resembles the Migdal stone. A carving of a temple or ark on wheels may reflect an earlier tradition. And a child's lead casket from the 3rd century bears similar features. Found in a cemetery close to the Naran synagogue near Jericho, the casket reflects ideas in the community that also designed the zodiac mosaic of the 5th century Naran synagogue floor, analyzed in the 3rd movie of this series. Made approximately 2 centuries after the Migdal stone, this lead coffin found near Jericho bears iconography resembling that of the Migdal stone. Both objects look like temples with columns and amphorae, and both objects refer symbolically to solstices, equinoxes, and zodiacal constellations of ascent and descent. Less complex than the Migdal stone, the casket portrays stars and columns in a way that breaks symmetry just enough to express a combination of Jewish and Gnostic understandings of the universe. Like the Migdal stone, the casket models the universe as a grand temple supported by 11 columns. Amphorae holds sacred water or oil, and 2 non-structural columns at each end of the top represent the summer and winter solstices at a moment when both rest on the horizon. A broad intersection of 3 lines in the middle of the top panel represents the crossing of the ecliptic, celestial equator, and meridian at the equinox. 12 stars on the top panel represent the 12 zodiacal constellations as well as the 12 tribes of Israel. 6 zodiacal constellations rest on one side of the meridian and 6 on the other. Symmetry rules the top panel, thus it's tempting to interpret the images on the coffin merely as decoration. However, the side panels break symmetry, revealing more than decorative intent. Beginning on the left side and proceeding counterclockwise, the panels display 1 star and 2 columns, a solstice, 4 stars, 3 columns, and 2 amphorae, 2 stars and 2 columns. The common association of 2 stars with Gemini provides assurance that this side represents the summer solstice. And then finally, 5 stars and 4 columns on the rear panel. The total of 12 stars on the sides of the coffin again refers to the 12 zodiacal constellations, but arranged this time in a Gnostic pattern. The 5 stars on the rear panel refer to the 5 constellations of descent, and the 7 stars, from winter solstice to summer solstice, refer to the 7 constellations of ascent. As on the Migdal stone, the total of 11 columns on the sides is 1 more than the sacred number 10 and 1 less than a zodiacal 12. In addition, each of the 2 close columns on the right side of the rear panel is half the width of other columns, apparently representing 1 column split into 2 parts. This reminds us of the analysis of the Sepphoris Synagogue zodiac mosaic in the 3rd movie. There we found that Kabalists divided Keter, the first sephirah of the Kabalistic tree of life, into 2 sephirot, creating the 11th sephirah, Dath, or knowledge. This suggests a degree of cultic similarity among the communities of Magdala, Sepphoris, and Naran. Beyond the 2 synagogue zodiac mosaics analyzed in the 3rd movie, only 2 examples of relatively complete Jewish zodiac mosaics remain to be considered. a 3rd century mosaic found at Hamath Tiberias, and a 6th century mosaic found at Beit Alpha. In these mosaics, symbols of zodiacal constellations contain roundels that portray Sol Invictus driving a chariot, solar deity iconography that Christians acquired from cults of Apollo and Mithras. Even the early Christian chapel beneath the Vatican portrayed Jesus as Sol Invictus. Mainstream Talmudic Judaism considered pagan images like these heretical in a Jewish religious context. However, if a Jewish community recognized the importance of Jesus in addition to following a Torah-observant lifestyle, it apparently accepted solar deity iconography for representing Jesus. Less complex than the synagogue mosaics previously discussed, mosaics that portrayed Sol Invictus represented the universe divided into 3 worlds. A world of ideal forms at the top that featured religious implements and a Torah shrine or temple modeled after the temple of Enlil in the northern stars of the constellation Heracles. A world of formation in which planetary and zodiacal influences clothed ideal forms falling into creation. And a world of action that included a list of donors who funded the mosaic at Hamath Tiberias, and the story about Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac at Beit Alpha. Above Abraham and Isaac at Beit Alpha, a row of 9 flowers represents Abraham's choice of life. As with the synagogue mosaics discussed in the 3rd movie, the Sol Invictus mosaics use pairs of lions to represent the constellations Leo Major and Leo Minor as guardians of the summer solstice during the age of Taurus. At Hamath Tiberias, the lions guard the names of donors, assuring they will attain places in heaven. At Beit Alpha, the lions guard the temple or shrine in the world of ideal forms. The symbolism on these synagogue mosaics is less rich than that on the mosaics that portray Apollo Aegeus. Nevertheless, the symbols seem to represent ideas similar to those in other religious zodiac mosaics. The Hamath Tiberias mosaic emphasizes vernal equinox sunrise and includes a crescent moon and star, which makes one wonder if the community associated the birth of Jesus with springtime. This is the same zodiac orientation as the Christian zodiac in the Decoulou monastery in Greece. Further, the rays of light emanating from Sol's nimbate head look like a Roman cross supporting a chi, a common Christian symbol of the crucifixion of Jesus. Regardless, the orientation of the sky on the Hamath Tiberias mosaic matches that on the Migdal stone, with constellations of ascent going from Capricorn on the right to Taurus, Gemini, and Cancer on the left. The Beit Alpha mosaic orients towards sunrise in Cancer, the gate through which divine spirit entered this universe. One sees a similar orientation on the Christian zodiac mosaic at the Basilica of San Miniato al Monte in Florence. The Beit Alpha path of ascent starts with Capricorn at the bottom and proceeds up the right side of the zodiacal circle toward Cancer. A lion and bull beneath the Abraham panel honor creation of the universe in the age of Taurus, as well as creation of the mosaic. They flank a statement in Aramaic describing the construction of the mosaic during the reign of Emperor Justin I, funded by donors in the community. In addition, a Greek inscription credits Marianos and his son Haninina for doing the work. 5 tilted squares at the top represented either the 5 constellations of descent or the 5 worlds of Kabbalah. 7 tilted squares on the right border metaphorically represented ascent, and 13 roundels delimited by vines with flowers climbed the left side, symbolic of the 13 possible lunar months in a year. As with the Orpheus mosaic described in my second movie, the roundels and squares may have held ritual significance in Gnostic-style initiations. There is much more to explore, but we have reached the end of this fourth and last movie, introducing the deep relationship between astrology and early Christian iconography. As discoveries of Gnostic literature have enriched our understanding of early Christianity, it's time to recognize possibilities for Gnostic astrological symbolism to do the same for early Christian iconography. Jews and Christians absorbed rich astrological understandings of the universe from Egyptian Hermeticism, which suggests an original mixing of Jewish and Egyptian ideas among Egyptian Jews at their temple in the land of Onias in the 2nd century BC. Subsequently, after Pompey the Great imposed Roman dominion over the Levant in the mid-1st century BC, Jews who disapproved of Roman control and the corruption of Jerusalem temple institutions looked to revolutionary New Age ideas to refresh their faith and find mystical understandings in ancient scripture. Inspired by biblical prophecy and the full weight of Alexandrian scientific and philosophical advances, the earliest Jewish Christians promulgated New Age ideas that emphasized the astrological importance of precisely that moment in history. These movies have introduced many concepts, well known in ancient times, but nevertheless that seem strange to modern viewers. Not everything that I have discussed will stand against informed scrutiny, but even the most skeptical viewer of these movies must now see that early Christians understood and cared about astrology. If these movies can help obtain new discoveries about early Christianity, I will be grateful to have played a small role. Thank you for taking the time to consider the information in these movies. If I can be of assistance, please don't hesitate to contact me.